18 yellow cards, a tunnel fight, a post-match insult caught on camera, and the most chaotic game of the modern World Cup. At the center of it all, the calmest man in football. For 2 decades, opponents had tried everything to provoke Messi. No one had managed it. But that night, something changed. What did Van Gaal say that was different? And why did it cost his country a place in the semifinals? A rivalry written in blood, Argentina versus the Netherlands, was never a normal match. Every time these two countries share a World Cup field, something breaks. 6 meetings across 5 decades, and not one ended in peace. In 1974, Johan Cruyff's Netherlands demolished Argentina 4-0. That thrashing was burned into Argentine football like a scar. 4 years later, in Buenos Aires, Argentina hosted the World Cup under a military dictatorship. The Dutch arrived without Cruyff. Argentina came out of the tunnel 5 minutes late, deliberately, while the crowd lost its mind. Kempes scored twice in extra time. Argentina lifted its first World Cup. The Netherlands refused to attend the trophy ceremony. 44 years later, Dutch football still had not accepted that result. In 1998, revenge came in the cruelest way. The match was 1-1 in the final minute when Ortega lost his mind, headbutted goalkeeper Van der Sar, and was sent off. Then, out of nowhere, a 60-yard pass dropped behind the Argentine defense. Dennis Bergkamp brought it down, beat the last defender with his second touch, and buried it with his third. 3 touches. One of the greatest goals in history. Netherlands 2, Argentina 1. In 2014, it was a suffocating semifinal in São Paulo. 120 scoreless minutes, decided on penalties. Romero saved 2. The Dutch went home empty-handed yet again. By December 2022, 5 decades of controversy and bitterness had been passed down from generation to generation. This was never just a football rivalry, it was a vendetta with a scoreboard. A backstory. The provocation did not begin at a press conference in Qatar. It began 20 years earlier, inside Camp Nou, when Van Gaal systematically destroyed the Barcelona career of Messi's childhood idol. In 2002, Van Gaal returned to Barcelona. His first move was to get rid of Rivaldo, the Ballon d'Or winner, for refusing to play on the left wing. Then came Juan Román Riquelme. In Argentina, Riquelme was royalty, a 2-time Copa Libertadores champion with Boca Juniors, a midfielder so elegant that an entire generation of Argentine kids grew up trying to imitate him. Before Riquelme even kicked a ball, Van Gaal publicly called him a political signing, and he told him directly, "You are the best player when you have the ball, but when you do not have it, we play with one less man." If that sounds familiar, it is because 20 years later, Van Gaal would say almost exactly the same thing about Messi before a World Cup quarterfinal. Van Gaal did not just criticize Riquelme, he buried him. He forced him to play out wide, scolded him publicly whenever he tried to find his natural position, ignored his goals. Riquelme played 42 matches for Barcelona, scored 6 goals, and never got the role that had made him one of the best in the world. In January 2003, Barcelona were 12th in La Liga, 3 points above the relegation zone. Van Gaal was fired, but the damage was done. Hristo Stoichkov summed it up without filters. Why did Riquelme not succeed at Barca? Because he had an idiot like Van Gaal as a coach. And there was someone else who never forgot what Van Gaal did to Riquelme. A left-footed teenager training at La Masia, who idolized Riquelme, who watched everything happen to his hero from inside the same building. The agent who brought Messi to Barcelona confirmed it years later. For him, Riquelme was one of his great idols. Leo just stared at him because he was very shy. That teenager was Lionel Messi, and he remembered everything, the provocation. When reporters asked Van Gaal how he planned to stop Messi, the Dutch coach answered with a smile. Messi is the most dangerous creative player. He can create a lot and score goals, but when they lose the ball and the opponent has possession, he does not do much. That is where our chances are. He does not do much. The exact same criticism, the same framing, the same Dutchman telling the world that an Argentine genius does wonderful things with the ball, but does not work hard enough without it. 20 years earlier, he had said it about Riquelme. The words were almost identical. When he was asked about his tactical plan to contain Messi, Van Gaal brushed it off with a gesture. It is not that hard to find an answer for how to stop him. The best player of all time. And Van Gaal treated the question like it was a minor inconvenience. Messi confirmed it a year later. I think Van Gaal provoked me intentionally. I do not like people talking before matches. I always respect everyone, but I like to be respected too. And they were not respectful toward us before the game. The match on December 9, 2022 at Lusail Stadium, the Argentine captain stepped onto the field carrying something the world had never seen him bring into a match. For 30 minutes, the game was tight and disciplined. The Dutch midfield shut every door before Messi could open it, but in the 35th minute, Messi got the ball 30 yards from goal, with 3 Dutch defenders blocking the way. He waited half a second longer than any other player would dare. Then he slipped a pass so precise that it sliced through the entire defensive line as if it did not exist. Molina finished calmly, 1-0. That pass was Messi's answer to Van Gaal. The man who said it was not that hard to stop him had just watched his defensive plan come apart because of a single ball. Minute 73, penalty. Messi takes it, sends Noppert the wrong way, 2-0, and then he does it. He does not celebrate with his teammates. He turns, walks toward the Dutch bench, plants his feet, cups his hands behind his ears, and stares directly at Louis van Gaal. Riquelme's celebration, the very same gesture his childhood idol had directed at the very same man inside Camp Nou 20 years earlier, in a World Cup quarterfinal, with the world watching. This was not a goal celebration. It was 20 years of history fired point blank. Messi himself admitted what he thought in that moment. What an idiot. They can still equalize. He was right. In the 83rd minute, Weghorst, the 6'5" striker Van Gaal had brought on to create chaos, rose and scored with a header, 2-1. Everything exploded. Paredes committed a foul near the sideline, got up, and blasted the ball straight into the Dutch bench. The substitutes stormed the field. Van Dijk charged into Paredes and knocked him to the ground. Bodies everywhere. The referee added 10 minutes of stoppage time. In the 101st minute, the final act of regulation, a free kick on the edge of the box. Everyone expected a cross. Instead, Koopmeiners played it short to the side. The wall moved a second too late. Weghorst controlled it and buried it in the corner. 2-2. Extra time solved nothing. The most chaotic match of the modern World Cup had gone to penalties. The shootout and the final chaos, Emiliano Martinez did not just save penalties, he destroyed the people taking them. And he had heard what Van Gaal said before the match, that the Netherlands had the advantage in a shootout, that if it came to penalties, the Dutch would win. Virgil van Dijk went first. Martinez stared him down, moved the ball, delayed, talked. Van Dijk shot to the right. Martinez guessed correctly. Save. Messi was next, calm, unhurried, as if the previous 2 hours of chaos had happened to someone else. He placed the ball, picked the corner, and scored. Bergwijn took the second Dutch penalty. Martinez was already in his head. Bergwijn shot low. Martinez dove. Another save. 2 Dutch penalties, 2 saves. The duel was over before it really began. When Lautaro Martinez got the chance to finish it, he did not hesitate. Low corner, net. Argentina won 4-3. Instead of relief and embraces, the Argentines sprinted toward the Dutch goal to celebrate in the face of every orange shirt they could find. Otamendi ran straight to the goal and cupped his hands behind his ears. The Dutch reacted. Another confrontation. Dumfries shoved an Argentine player and received a second yellow, then red, during the penalty celebration. The match ended with 18 yellow cards and 1 red, a World Cup record that may never be matched. The fight continued in the tunnel. Reports emerged hours later of clashes between staff members from both delegations in the corridors of Lusail Stadium. Messi spoke in front of the TYC sports cameras, still wearing his jersey, still furious. The calm that had defined his public life for 20 years was gone. He went after Van Gaal. Van Gaal sells the idea that he plays good football, but what he did was put tall, people on, and lump the ball long. He went after the referee, and then Wout Weghorst walked behind him. Messi turned his head, looked him in the eyes, and said, "What are you looking at, idiot?" On camera. No filter, no apology. The most famous footballer in the world saying to an opponent's face exactly what he thought, with a microphone 6 inches from his mouth. The clip went viral in minutes. By midnight, it was the most searched phrase on the internet. By the next morning, it was printed on t-shirts all across Buenos Aires. Emi Martinez had his own verdict on Van Gaal's predictions. I heard Van Gaal say they had the advantage in penalties, that if it went to penalties, they would win. I think he needs to keep his mouth shut. The ending. The Netherlands went home. 2 weeks later, when Messi lifted the World Cup in that same stadium after beating Croatia in the semifinal and France in the greatest final ever played, one image kept coming back. Not the trophy lift, not the golden ball. The gesture with his hands behind his ears, aimed at a 71-year-old Dutch coach who thought he could dismiss Lionel Messi the same way he had dismissed Juan Román Riquelme. That answers the question the football world asked that night in Lucé. What happens when you provoke the GOAT? You lose.